Hi everybody. Before we start the story, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is. If you do that, YouTube will keep showing you more stories like this one. Okay, let's start now. The wallpaper in the upstairs bedroom was pulsing. Not like my imagination was playing tricks, actually expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched human breathing. I pressed my palm against it, and the paper was warm, fever warm. My name's Caroline Marsh, and I'd bought the Hutchins place for $23,000 at a Cherokee County estate sale on September 9th, 2022. Everyone said I was getting the deal of a lifetime, a 3-story Victorian on 40 acres of Appalachian hollow land, built in 1876. The realtor, a woman named Diane with tobacco-stained fingers, had smiled too wide when I signed the papers. "You got yourself a real piece of history," she'd said, and I'd heard something underneath her words. I didn't understand then. I understood it now. The breathing started 3 days after I moved in. At first, I thought it was the house. Settling old places make noise. Everyone knows that. But settling doesn't happen in rhythm. Settling doesn't pause, hold, then exhale with enough force to make the curtains sway. I'd wake up at 3:17 every morning to that sound, a deep inhalation that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the floorboards, from the spaces between things. I told myself it was the wind coming through the mountains. The hollow was shaped like a bowl, surrounded by ridges thick with oak and rhododendron, and wind did strange things in places like this. But wind doesn't get warmer. Wind doesn't develop a smell. By the second week, the breathing had a scent copper and something sweet rotten, like meat that's just starting to turn. It was strongest in the upstairs bedroom, the one with the faded rose wallpaper and the single window that looked out over the hollow. I'd chosen that room because it got morning light, because it felt peaceful when I'd first walked through during the showing. I'd been so goddamn stupid. The wallpaper started moving on October 3rd. I'd been lying in bed, unable to sleep because of the breathing. It had gotten louder, more insistent, and I could feel it now, a pressure in my chest that matched each inhalation. That's when I saw the wall beside my bed swell outward, a gentle rise like a chest filling with air, then fall, rise, fall, the pattern continuing across the wall in waves. I turned on every light in the house and slept on the couch. The next morning, I called a contractor from Hayesville, a man named Roy Pritchard, who'd lived in these mountains all his 63 years. He arrived in a truck, held together with rust and prayer, walked through my house with a measuring tape and a frown that deepened with each room. "This the Hutchins place?" he asked, though he clearly already knew. "Yes. Do you know anything about it?" Roy ran his hand along the doorframe, his fingers tracing something I couldn't see. "Family lived here for 4 generations. Last one was Vera Hutchins. She died in that upstairs bedroom in 1998. Took them 3 days to find her." He paused, looking at me with eyes that had seen things he didn't want to talk about. House was empty for 24 years after that. Had 5 different owners. None of them lasted more than a month. "Why didn't anyone tell me this? Would you have believed them?" He packed up his tools without doing any work, wouldn't take money when I offered it. At the door, he turned back. The Hutchins family had a saying, "The house takes what it needs." You should think about what that means. I should have left then. Should have walked out the door with Roy and never looked back. But I'd put everything I had into this place, my savings, my dreams of starting over, my escape from a life that had beaten me down in ways I didn't want to remember. I wasn't going to let some old mountain superstition run me off. That night, the breathing changed. It was faster now, almost panting. And it wasn't just the upstairs bedroom anymore. Every room in the house pulsed with it, the walls moving in synchronization like I was inside something's ribcage. The air got thick and wet, hard to breathe, tasting of copper and decay. I locked myself in the bathroom on the first floor, the only room where the walls stayed still, and tried to convince myself I was having a breakdown. Stress, isolation, too much change too fast, but I could still hear it through the door. That wet, labored breathing, getting faster and more desperate with each cycle. At 3:17 in the morning, it stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. It pressed against my eardrums, heavy and expectant, like the moment before someone screams. I stayed in that bathroom for 2 more hours, watching the crack under the door for movement, for shadows, for anything that would explain what was happening. When dawn light finally crept through the frosted window, I opened the door. The house had changed. The walls were no longer painted plaster, they were skin. Pale, translucent skin stretched over the framework, traced with blue veins that pulsed with sluggish movement. The floor beneath my feet was warm and slightly giving, like walking on flesh. The door frames had ridges now, horizontal lines that looked disturbingly like ribs. I ran for the front door. My hand closed around the knob, slick and fever-hot, and pulled. It didn't open. I yanked harder, panic flooding through me, and felt the knob pulse under my palm. Once, twice, a heartbeat. The breathing started again, but this time I realized it wasn't coming from the house. The entire structure inhaling and exhaling, the walls expanding and contracting, the floor rising and falling beneath me. I was inside something alive, something that had been slowly waking up since the moment I'd signed those papers. I broke a window in the kitchen. It bled and crawled through, cutting my hands on glass that was warm and slick. I ran across the yard toward my car, my feet slipping on October wet grass, and didn't look back until I was behind the wheel with the engine running. The house looked normal. White clapboard siding, green shutters, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs I'd bought at a yard sale. Completely, perfectly ordinary, but every window was dark, and behind the glass I could see movement, the curtains swaying in rhythm, in, out, in, out. I drove to a motel in Murphy and called the police. They sent a deputy named Collins who looked barely old enough to shave. He drove me back to the house, his body language radiating skepticism, and I watched from the car as he walked up to the front door. The door opened before he touched it. He went inside. I counted to 60, then called his cell phone. It rang from inside the house, but he didn't answer. I counted to 300. He didn't come out. I called the sheriff's office. They sent 2 more deputies. They went inside. None of them came out. The sheriff himself showed up 40 minutes later, a man named Dockery with a face like worn leather and eyes that had stopped being surprised by anything years ago. He didn't go in the house. Instead, he sat in his cruiser next to mine and made a phone call that lasted 15 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at me. "You need to leave," he said. "Right now. Drive away and don't come back. There are 3 people in there. There's nothing in there." His voice was flat, final. "That house has been empty for 26 years. You never bought it. The sale never happened. Diane Morrison died in a car accident 3 weeks ago. I pulled up the photos on my phone, pictures I'd taken of the house, of the paperwork, of my furniture inside. The gallery was empty. Every photo of the house was gone, replaced by white squares with error messages. "Go home," Sheriff Dockery said. "Back to wherever you came from. Forget this place exists." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, to make him explain what was happening. But his hand was resting on his gun, and his eyes told me that, if I pushed, I wouldn't like where that push led. I drove east, back toward Asheville, back toward a life I'd been trying to escape. In my rearview mirror, I watched the sheriff stand beside his cruiser, making another phone call, his gaze locked on that white house in the hollow. I never saw it again, but I can still feel it sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to sleep. A rhythm in my chest that doesn't quite match my heartbeat. A warmth in the walls of whatever room I'm in. The sensation of being inside something that's alive, something that's breathing, something that's still hungry. The house takes what it needs, and I think it took something from me that I didn't know I could lose. Some piece of myself that stayed behind in that upstairs bedroom with the rose wallpaper, trapped in walls made of skin and need. Sometimes I wake up at 3:17 in the morning and I can't breathe right, like something's pressing down on my lungs, and I wonder if what I left behind is still breathing for me, or if I'm breathing for it. I've tried to find the house again, driven back to Cherokee County, searched property records, asked questions in bars and diners. No one remembers a Hutchins place. No one remembers Diane Morrison. The hollow where it stood is empty on every map I've checked, just a blank space in the mountains where something should be but isn't. Except I know it's there, waiting, breathing, growing stronger with each person it takes, with each piece of life it consumes. And sometimes, when the wind is right and I'm not thinking about it, I can smell copper and sweet rot, and I know that the house remembers me too. The house takes what it needs. I just don't know if it's done with me yet. There were 247 photographs nailed to the walls when I found the locked room, and every single one of them showed me. My Uncle Silas died on August 14th, 2023, and left me his house in Madison County, a squat, gray farmhouse built into the side of a mountain, surrounded by hemlock trees so thick the sunlight barely reached the ground. I'd met him exactly twice in my 31 years, both times at family funerals where he'd stood apart from everyone else, watching people with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When his lawyer called to tell me I'd inherited the property, my first instinct was to refuse it. But I was between jobs, between relationships, between everything that makes life feel solid, and the lawyer mentioned the house was worth at least $300,000. I could sell it, use the money to start over somewhere, far from these mountains where my family's roots went deep and twisted. I should have known better. Nothing in these mountains comes without a price. The house was worse than I'd imagined. The exterior gray wasn't paint, it was mold, thick as fur, climbing up from the foundation. Inside, the air tasted old, like breathing in decades of dust and silence. Furniture sat under stained sheets, and the floorboards groaned under my weight with sounds that were almost words. I found the locked room on my second day there. It was on the ground floor, at the end of a hallway that seemed longer than the house's exterior dimensions allowed. The door was solid oak, ancient-looking, with a keyhole but no knob. I'd walked past it 3 times before I noticed something. The door was warm, not room temperature, body temperature, like something alive was pressed against the other side. I found a crowbar in the basement, wedged it into the door frame, and pried. The wood shrieked as it splintered, and the door swung inward, and that's when I saw them. Photographs, hundreds of them, nailed directly into the plaster walls from floor to ceiling. No frames, just pictures, overlapping each other, creating a collage that covered every surface except the floor and ceiling. The room was empty, otherwise no furniture, no windows, just photographs and the smell of developer chemicals, sharp and acrid. Every photograph showed me, not recent pictures. These were older, spanning years. Me as a child on a swing set I didn't remember. Me as a teenager walking out of a school I'd never attended. Me in my 20s, standing in a kitchen I'd never seen, looking directly at the camera with an expression I'd never made, mouth slightly open, eyes wide with fear. My hands started shaking. I pulled one photograph off the wall, tearing the paper around the nail. The image showed me sleeping in a bed. I recognized my apartment in Knoxville, the one I'd lived in 3 years ago. But I'd never taken this photo. No one had been in that room while I slept. The angle was from above, looking straight down at my face, close enough to see the individual hairs on my pillow. I tore down another, me walking to my car in a parking garage. Another, me sitting alone in a diner, coffee cup halfway to my lips. Another, me crying in a bathroom stall, mascara running down my face. I remembered that day, remembered that particular breakdown, but no one had been there. I'd locked the door. The room started feeling smaller. The walls seemed to lean in, those hundreds of images of my face staring back at me from every angle. Different ages, different moments, different versions of myself I remembered being, and some I didn't, all captured by someone, something that had been watching me for years, maybe my entire life. At the back of the room, behind 3 layers of overlapping photos, I found the oldest one. The paper was yellowed, cracked, developed using a process that hadn't been common since the 1950s. It showed a baby in a hospital bassinet, eyes closed, newborn wrinkled, written on the back in faded ink. Caroline Ruth James. Born the 3rd of March, 1992. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She's perfect. She's mine. The handwriting was Uncle Silas's. I recognized it from the birthday cards he'd sent me as a child, cards that had always felt wrong, too familiar, signed with love in a way that made my mother's face go tight. I heard something then. A click, the mechanical sound of a camera shutter. It came from behind me. I spun around, and the doorway was filled with darkness, but not the normal darkness of a shadowed hallway. This was darker, thicker, darkness with depth and texture, and inside it, a red light glowed, small, steady, the kind of light that appears in the corner of a camera when it's recording. Another click, another, coming faster now, from multiple sources, surrounding me. The walls themselves seemed to be taking pictures, the house capturing this moment, me standing in this room, surrounded by evidence of surveillance, finally understanding what I'd inherited. I ran, pushed through that darkness in the doorway. It was cold, so cold my lungs seized and stumbled into the hallway. Behind me, I heard those clicks accelerating into a rapid-fire staccato, like applause, like celebration. I made it to the front door before I saw them. New photographs, scattered across the floor. Fresh, still wet with chemicals. They showed me from 30 seconds ago, me running down the hallway, face twisted in terror. Me reaching for the door. Me, in the exact position I was in right now, hand on the doorknob, looking down at photographs of myself. The picture showed what happened next. In the photo, I was turning around, looking behind me with my mouth open in a scream, and in the background of the image, standing in the hallway I'd just run through, was Uncle Silas, dead for 3 weeks, buried in the Baptist cemetery in Marshall. But there he was in the photograph, solid and real, holding a camera up to his face, and behind him, dozens of other figures stood in the shadows, all holding cameras, all pointed at me. I didn't turn around. I yanked the door open and ran to my car, the October air burning my lungs, my feet slipping on wet leaves. I drove 5 miles before I felt safe enough to stop shaking. I called the police from a gas station, told them everything, showed them the photographs I'd stuffed in my jacket pocket. The officer, a woman named Teresa Gonzalez, looked at the pictures for a long time, her expression shifting from skepticism to something else, something like recognition. "Your uncle," she said slowly. "Did he ever work in photography?" "I don't know. I barely knew him. There's been complaints about that house for 30 years. People seeing flashes from the windows at night, hearing camera shutters. 5 different people reported being followed by a man with a camera, but we could never prove anything." She handed the photos back to me. "After your uncle died, the calls stopped. We thought it was over." "What was over?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she pulled up something on her computer, turned the screen toward me. Missing persons reports, 11 of them, spanning from 1983 to 2020, all from Madison County, all women between the ages of 22 and 35. "We found photographs," Officer Gonzalez said, "in the homes of some of these women. Pictures they didn't take, showing them in private moments. Your uncle was suspected, but we never had enough for a warrant." And then, the women would vanish, completely. No bodies, no evidence, nothing, except their photographs. My throat felt like it was closing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to burn that house down." She said it quietly, leaning forward so no one else in the station could hear. "I'm saying your uncle found something in those mountains, or something found him, and it's been feeding on those women for 40 years. I'm saying that legally, I can't help you." I sat in my car in that gas station parking lot for 2 hours, trying to decide what to do. I could walk away, let someone else deal with the house. But those photographs, they weren't just watching me now. They'd been watching me my entire life. Every private moment, every vulnerable second, captured and catalogued and nailed to a wall by a man who'd written, "She's mine," on the back of my infant picture. I drove back as the sun was setting. The house looked different in the dying light. The mold-gray exterior seemed darker, and every window reflected the orange sky in a way that looked like flames. I went to the basement, found 2 5-gallon cans of gasoline Uncle Silas had stored there, and carried them upstairs. The photograph room was different. There were more pictures now, hundreds more, covering the ceiling now too, so that every surface showed me. But these weren't old photographs. These were from today, me walking through the house this morning, me making coffee, me standing in this exact doorway an hour ago, looking at these walls, and new ones. Photographs that hadn't happened yet, showing me in this room, splashing gasoline across the walls, showing me lighting a match, showing me running through smoke, showing me standing outside, watching the house burn, showing me failing to escape. That last set of photographs was nailed above the doorway. A sequence of images showing the fire spreading faster than I could run, showing me trapped in the hallway, showing me on the ground with smoke pouring over me, showing Uncle Silas and those other figures emerging from the shadows, cameras raised, capturing my final moments. The house knew what I was planning. It had always known. It had photographed the future the same way it had photographed my past, and it was showing me exactly how this ended. I poured the gasoline anyway, splashed it across those walls, across hundreds of images of myself, across Uncle Silas's surveillance and obsession and hunger. The chemical smell mixed with the developer's scent, creating something toxic and flammable. I lit the match. The photographs caught instantly, flames racing across the walls faster than seemed physically possible. But I was already moving, already running the path I'd memorized, the path those future photographs had shown me I'd failed to complete. I made it 3 steps farther than the pictures predicted. It was enough. I crashed through the front door as the ceiling behind me collapsed in a shower of burning photographs, each one briefly illuminated as it fell, hundreds of images of my face burning up, turning to ash, finally destroyed. I crawled across the yard, lungs screaming, and collapsed in the dirt as the house went up like a torch. The fire department came, saved the trees, let the house burn to its foundation. They asked questions I couldn't answer, looked at me with suspicion. I understood, and finally ruled it an accident. Old house, old wiring, unfortunate but not unexpected. They never found Uncle Silas's body in the ashes. The coroner said it must have burned completely, but I knew better. He'd never been in that house, not really. Whatever had been living there, watching through those photographs, wearing his face and his obsession that wasn't something fire could destroy. I moved to Oregon, as far from those mountains as I could get without leaving the continent. Changed my name, changed my hair, changed everything I could change. Then the envelope arrived. No return address, just a manila envelope with my new name, my new address, delivered to an apartment I'd rented under a fake ID. Inside were 12 photographs. Me walking into my building yesterday. Me grocery shopping. Me sleeping in my new bed, taken from above, close enough to count my eyelashes. And one more photograph. Not of me, of a room I'd never seen. Walls covered floor to ceiling with blank spaces, empty nails waiting for new pictures. Hundreds of empty spots, ready to be filled. Written on the back, in Uncle Silas's handwriting, "She's mine. She's always been mine. The house was just the beginning. I don't sleep anymore. Not really. I lie in bed with every light on, listening for the sound of a camera shutter, waiting for that mechanical click that means I'm being captured again. I've covered every mirror, every reflective surface, terrified of seeing a flash in the corner of my eye. But I know it doesn't matter. The photographs are still being taken, the room is still being filled, and somewhere in those mountains, in a place that exists between the trees and the shadows and the hollows where sunlight doesn't reach, Uncle Silas is still developing pictures. Pictures of me now, pictures of me tomorrow, pictures of every moment I have left, cataloged and displayed for something that's been watching me since the day I was born. The house burned, but the watching never stops, and I'm starting to understand that I was never going to inherit Uncle Silas's property. I was always going to become it. The children were singing down in the root cellar, the same 5 words over and over, and they'd been dead for 73 years. I heard them the first night I slept in the Cordell house, a crumbling 2-story frame structure in Rabun County that I'd bought for $36,000 at a tax auction. October 19th, 2023. The house had been abandoned since 1950, the property records said, though nobody at the courthouse would explain why it had sat empty for so long. The realtor who'd shown me the place, an older man named Davis, with hands that shook constantly, had pointed out the property lines, the well, the stand of chestnut oaks that were probably worth more than the house. He never took me near the root cellar. I didn't even know it existed until I found the door. It was in the kitchen floor, hidden under a rug that had rotted into the boards. A wooden hatch, maybe 3 feet square, with an iron ring for a handle. The wood was different from the rest of the floor, darker, older, stained with something that might have been creosote or might have been something else. Something organic. I opened it that first night because I'm not superstitious, because I bought this place to flip it, and I needed to document every feature, every problem, every selling point. The hinges screamed as I pulled the hatch up, and cold air poured out, carrying a smell like wet earth and vegetables gone soft with rot. Stone steps led down into darkness. I counted 16 of them with my flashlight before the beam found the bottom, a dirt floor, stone walls, the skeletal remains of wooden shelving along the sides, a typical root cellar, the kind you'd find under half the old houses in Appalachia, places where people stored potatoes and apples and jars of green beans put up for winter. But there was something else down there, something that made my light seem dimmer, weaker, like the darkness was thick enough to choke it. I almost didn't go down. Something in my brainstem, some ancient warning system, was screaming at me to close the hatch and nail it shut and forget I'd ever seen it. But I'd paid $36,000 for this property, and I wasn't going to let a creepy basement spook me. I made it 8 steps down before I heard them. Children's voices, thin and reedy, coming from somewhere in the darkness below, singing the same 5 words, repeated over and over in a melody that was almost familiar, like a nursery rhyme I'd heard once and forgotten. We're waiting in the roots. We're waiting in the roots. We're waiting in the roots. My flashlight hit the bottom of the stairs, swept across the dirt floor, and I saw them. Not the children. Their handprints. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Pressed into the dirt walls like fossils. Small hands with fingers spread wide. Some at adult height. Some at knee height. Some on the ceiling, which was impossible. The singing stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard breathing. Not my own. This was slower, deeper, coming from multiple sources all around me in that tiny cellar. The air moved like something was exhaling directly into my face, and I smelled earth. Yes, but also something sweet rotten, like fruit that's fermented in its own skin. I ran. Scrambled back up those stone steps so fast I cracked my shin on the edge, threw myself through the hatch, and slammed it shut. The singing started again immediately, muffled now by the wood but still audible. Those same 5 words spiraling up from below. I dragged the kitchen table over the hatch, piled boxes on top of it, went outside and stood in the October night air, sucking in clean breaths, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I could still hear them, even through the floor, even through the walls. That singing wormed its way into my ears. I got in my truck, drove to a motel in Clayton, and didn't come back for 3 days. When I finally returned daylight, mid-morning, with a contractor named Webb I'd hired to assess the property. The table had been moved, not violently shoved aside, but carefully repositioned against the wall, the boxes stacked neatly beside it. The hatch was open. "Root cellar," Webb said, peering down into the darkness. "These old mountain houses, they all got them. This is a good one, stone walls. Probably stays 55 degrees year-round. That's a selling point." "You hear anything?" I asked. He cocked his head, listening. But I could hear them, faint now, barely a whisper, but still there, still singing. Webb went down with a work light, his boots echoing on the stone steps. I watched from the kitchen, every muscle in my body tensed to run. He was down there for maybe 5 minutes before he came back up, and his face was wrong. Not scared, confused, like he'd seen something that didn't fit with how he understood the world to work. "There's names down there," he said, "carved into the walls. Kids' names, looks like. Maybe 30 of them." "What kind of names?" "Sarah Cordell, age 8. James Cordell, age 6. Rebecca Cordell, age 10. He paused. "They all got dates. 1949, 1950. all within about 6 months of each other. I looked it up that afternoon at the Rawbun County Library, scrolling through digitized newspaper archives on a computer that took 5 minutes to load each page. I found it in the Clayton Tribune from March 1950. Tragedy strikes Cordell family. 7 children lost. The article was short, clinical in the way small-town newspapers used to report horror. The Cordell family, mother, father, and 7 children ranging from age 5 to 14 had lived in the house I just bought. In the winter of 1949, during a particularly brutal cold snap, all 7 children had died within a 3-month period. Different causes listed for each: pneumonia, scarlet fever, influenza, infected injury, malnutrition. The parents, Thomas and Eleanor Cordell, had buried their children on the property. The house was abandoned in spring of 1950. The parents were never seen again. There was a photo with the article. A family portrait, stiff and formal in the way of that era. But what made my hands start shaking was the background. The photo had been taken in front of the house, my house, and standing in the doorway behind the family, barely visible in the shadows, was another figure, small, child-sized, with eyes that seemed to look directly out of the photograph and into mine. I went back to the house that evening. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy, that there was a rational explanation. Maybe because $36,000 was every cent I had in the world, and walking away meant losing everything. The hatch was open again. I hadn't closed it. I knew I hadn't closed it. The singing was louder now, not just the same 5 words anymore. Now there were verses, a full song that rose and fell with childish enthusiasm. I couldn't make out all the words, but I caught fragments, down below where the roots grow deep, where mama's tears and papa's sleep, where the hungry dark will never stop, where the littlest ones go into the crop. I should have run, should have gotten in my truck and never looked back, but something was pulling me toward that hatch, something that felt like fingers closed around my wrist, tugging me gently but insistently toward the darkness below. I took the first step down. The singing got louder, happier, like children welcoming a friend. Another step. The handprints on the walls seemed fresher now, like they'd been pressed into wet clay moments ago. The smell was overwhelming, rot and earth and something sweet. Another step. I could see the bottom now. The dirt floor was different. There were shapes in it, patterns, like something had been moving just beneath the surface, creating ridges and furrows. Another step. My flashlight beam caught movement. The dirt was moving, slowly undulating like water, and small hands were pushing up through it. Fingers first, then palms, then wrists, reaching up toward the ceiling, reaching up toward me. "We're waiting in the roots," the children sang. "We're waiting in the roots. Come down and plant yourself. Come down and help us grow." I understood then. The Cordell children hadn't died from disease. They'd been fed to something. Put into the ground in that root cellar where things were stored for winter, where the dark kept everything fresh and preserved and ready for when it was needed. Their parents had fed them to the house, to the land, to something old that lived in the soil beneath these mountains. And now it was hungry again. The hands grabbed my ankle. They were solid, real, cold as clay, and strong as roots. They pulled, and I fell, cracking my head on the stone steps, sliding down toward that writhing dirt floor where dozens of child-sized hands were emerging, reaching, waiting to pull me under. I kicked, felt something crack under my heel bone. Wood, and the grip loosened enough for me to scramble backwards. I crawled up those steps on my hands and knees, feeling fingers brush my legs, my back, my hair, trying to find purchase. The singing turned to screaming, not angry, but disappointed, like children told they can't have a treat they'd been promised. I made it to the kitchen and slammed the hatch. Heard those small hands pounding on the underside, a rapid drumming that sounded like rain. I dragged everything I could find on top of it, the table, the chairs, the refrigerator, boxes of tools, anything with weight. The pounding continued for 3 hours. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse. I sat in my truck with the doors locked, watching the house, waiting for dawn. As the sun came up, I saw them in the windows, children's faces, pressed against the glass. 7 of them, different windows, different ages, all watching me with eyes that were too dark, too old, too hungry. I called the sheriff's office, told them I needed to report something at the Cordell property. The dispatcher went quiet for a long moment before she said, "We don't respond to calls from that address." "What?" "The Cordell house isn't serviced by emergency services. It's been designated a historical site." Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "If you're having problems there, you need to leave. No one can help you on that property." I drove to the sheriff's office anyway, made them explain it to me. The deputy who finally talked a man named Chambers, who looked like he'd been working in these mountains since before I was born, laid it out plain. Every 20 years or so, someone buys that house, and every time, something goes wrong. People disappear, or they go crazy, or they just change. He leaned forward. The Cordells weren't the first family in that house. There's been something wrong with that land since before there was a house on it. Cherokee wouldn't go near it. Called it the place where children are planted. Said the earth there was hungry. So you just let people buy it, knowing this? We try to warn folks, but the county needs tax money, and technically, there's nothing illegal about selling land where bad things happen. He pulled out a form. "Sign this. It says you're abandoning your claim to the property. You walk away, take the loss, and we'll make sure no one bothers you about it." I didn't sign. $36,000. Everything I had. I went back one more time. Had to. The bank wouldn't let me walk away from the mortgage without proof the house was uninhabitable. I needed photographs, documentation, something to justify abandoning the investment. The root cellar hatch was off its hinges, lying on the kitchen floor. The darkness below was absolute, swallowing the beam of my flashlight like water swallows a stone. The singing had stopped, but I could hear something else. Now a wet, sliding sound, like something large moving through mud. I took my photos quickly, documenting damage, documenting danger. My hands shaking so badly the images came out blurred. I was heading for the door when I saw the dirt. It was everywhere, coming up through the floorboards in thin streams, spreading across the kitchen like roots, like veins, like the fingers of something vast and patient that had been waiting beneath the house for longer than houses had existed in these mountains. The dirt was moving toward me slowly, inexorably, and in it I could see shapes. Small bodies, preserved and mummified, children who'd been planted in the earth and had grown into something else, something that wasn't dead, but wasn't alive either. One of them opened its eyes, smiled with a mouth full of soil. "We're waiting in the roots," it whispered. "We're always waiting. And you came down. You touched the earth. Now the earth knows you." I ran, got in my truck and drove, and I didn't stop driving until I crossed the state line into South Carolina. I never went back. Let the bank take the property. Let my credit burn. Let everything I'd worked for disappear into the same hole that had swallowed the Cordells and whoever had been there before them. But I can still hear them sometimes. Late at night, when everything's quiet. Children singing about roots and waiting and planting and growing. And sometimes, when I walk barefoot across carpet or grass or tile, I feel something beneath the surface, a presence in the ground, in the earth that exists beneath every floor and foundation and parking lot in the world. The earth is patient, the earth is hungry, and I touched it. I went down into the dark where the Cordell children were planted, and now it knows my name. I live on the 3rd floor now. Won't go higher, won't go lower. 3 floors of steel and concrete between me and the ground. But I know it doesn't matter. The roots go deep, deeper than basements, deeper than bedrock, deeper than anything humans have built. And somewhere in those depths, 7 children who died in 1950 are still singing, still waiting, still growing into something vast and terrible. They're waiting for me to sleep, waiting for me to let my guard down, waiting for the day when the earth beneath my building gets hungry enough to reach up 3 floors and pull me down into the roots where everything is preserved, where everything waits, where children sing forever in the dark. We're waiting in the roots. We're always waiting. And now, so am I. Something started knocking back, and it knew my name. I found the rules for the knocking game carved into the wooden beam above the fireplace in my grandmother's house. 3 lines of text, shallow and old, the letters filled with decades of soot and dust. I discovered them on November 2nd, 2023, while cleaning out the place after her funeral. The house was a narrow 2-story structure wedged into a hollow in Watauga County, surrounded by black walnut trees that made the yard perpetually dark. The carved text read, "Knock 3 times. Wait 3 breaths. Knock twice more. Never knock 6 times. Never answer the 7th knock." I'd grown up visiting this house every summer, spending long weeks with my grandmother while my parents worked. I'd memorized every creak in the floorboards, every water stain on the ceiling, every smell. But I'd never noticed these words before. I ran my fingers over the carving. The letters were deep enough to have been deliberate, carved with purpose and care. Beneath them, someone had scratched tally marks into the wood. I counted 64 of them, grouped in sets of 5. My grandmother had died in this house, fell down the stairs at 83 years old, broke her neck, and lay at the bottom for 2 days before anyone found her. The coroner said she'd died instantly, but her face told a different story. Her eyes were open, mouth stretched wide in an expression that wasn't pain. It was recognition, like she'd seen something at the bottom of those stairs, something she'd been expecting. I should have sold the place immediately, should have called an estate sale company and walked away. But the market was bad, and the house was paid off, and my life in Charlotte had gotten complicated in ways I didn't want to examine. So I decided to stay for a few weeks, clean it out properly, maybe figure out what those carved words meant. The first knock came that night. 3 sharp raps on the front door. I checked my phone 2:47 in the morning. I was upstairs in my grandmother's bedroom, trying to sleep in sheets that still smelled like her lavender lotion. The knock was loud enough to echo through the house, confident, like whoever was outside had every right to be there. I went downstairs and turned on the porch light. Nobody there. The November wind moved through the walnut trees, making their branches scrape against the house's siding. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, looking out at the empty yard, before I went back to bed. 3 more knocks woke me at 4:15. Same volume, same rhythm, same empty porch when I checked. This time, I noticed something. The knocks weren't coming from the door, they were coming from inside the wall beside it, like someone was trapped in the space between the interior and exterior boards, hammering with their knuckles. I didn't sleep after that. Made coffee as the sun came up, tried to convince myself it was the house settling, expansion and contraction, the normal sounds of an old structure. But houses don't settle in groups of 3. Houses don't knock with rhythm. I called my Uncle David, my grandmother's youngest son, asked him if he knew anything about the carving above the fireplace. The silence on the phone lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "You found that, did you?" "What is it?" "Something your grandmother's mother taught her, something that goes back further than that. There's families in these mountains. They play games to keep things controlled, things that live in the hollow places, things that get curious." He paused. "Your grandmother was real good at those games. Never missed a rule. Never broke the pattern." "What pattern? Did you read what it says? About the knocking?" I recited the carved text. Uncle David made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "Then you know what to do," he said. "And you know what not to do. Just follow the rules, and you'll be fine. Break them, and—" He didn't finish, just hung up. I spent that day researching. The county library had a historical society section, dusty books about Appalachian folklore and superstitions. I found 3 references to knocking games, all slightly different, all with the same core warning. These games weren't entertainment. They were negotiations, ways to communicate with things that lived in the spaces between walls, between worlds, between what was real and what shouldn't be. The rules were important. Break them, and the things you were negotiating with would consider the contract void. That night, I waited by the front door. 2:47 in the morning, right on schedule, the knocking came. 3 sharp raps, clear as gunshots in the silent house. I knocked back, 3 times, waited, 3 breaths, counted them slowly, in and out. then knocked twice more. The silence that followed felt alive, expectant. Then something knocked back. 5 times, matching my pattern exactly. The sound came from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet, the entire house vibrating with each knock. I didn't sleep. Sat in the living room with every light on, waiting for morning. The house creaked and groaned around me, but there was no more knocking. Not that night. It started again the next evening. 3 knocks at 2:47. I responded with the proper pattern. 5 knocks answered. But this time, after the 5th knock, there was a pause, then a 6th knock. Quiet, tentative, testing. I remembered the carved warning. Never knock 6 times. I didn't respond to the 6th knock, held my breath, pressed my back against the wall, and waited. The house went silent. For exactly 3 minutes, I counted every second on my phone. Then something else started. Footsteps, inside the walls. Moving slowly through the house, from the front door toward the back, like someone was walking through the empty spaces between the studs. The footsteps passed right by me, inches from where I stood, and I felt cold air leaking through the plaster. The footsteps stopped at the stairs, paused, then began to climb. 1 step at a time, slow and deliberate, moving up to the 2nd floor. I heard them walk across the hallway above me, heard them stop outside my grandmother's bedroom. 3 knocks. From inside the room I'd been sleeping in. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked at the end of the driveway, watching the house. Lights I hadn't left on appeared in windows. Shadows moved behind the curtains. At exactly 6:47 in the morning, 4 hours after the knocking started, everything went still. I went back inside when the sun was fully up. The house looked normal, felt normal. But in my grandmother's bedroom, I found something new carved into the wooden headboard of her bed. A single tally mark, fresh. The wood beneath it was pale and unscarred. 65 marks now. I understood then. My grandmother had been playing this game for years. Every mark represented a night she'd successfully followed the rules, a night she'd negotiated with whatever lived in the hollow spaces of this house. 64 successful nights, and then she'd fallen down the stairs. I should have left, should have run and never looked back, but something kept me there. A morbid curiosity, maybe, or the realization that if I left now, I'd never know what I was running from, never know what had killed my grandmother. That night, I prepared. Set up cameras in every room, recording equipment on the stairs, motion sensors in the hallways. I wanted documentation, proof, something to show that I wasn't losing my mind. The knocking came at 2:47, 3 times, loud and insistent. I knocked back. 3 times, 3 breaths, twice more. 5 knocks answered. Then a 6th, then a 7th. I hadn't knocked 7 times, but something else had. The rule carved above the fireplace. Never answer the 7th knock. I stayed silent, didn't move. The house held its breath with me. Then the screaming started. It came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, the spaces between. A child's scream, high and terrified and endless. Except it wasn't one child. It was dozens of them, hundreds, screaming in perfect unison, their voices layered over each other until the sound became physical, pressing against my eardrums like hands. I fell to my knees, hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The screaming was inside my head now, bypassing my ears entirely, resonating in my skull. The walls began to bulge inward, the plaster cracking, something pressing against the interior surfaces from behind. Shapes emerged from the cracks' fingers, thin and wrong, too many joints, pushing through the walls like they were paper. My cameras were catching this. I could see the red recording lights, still blinking, still documenting. Evidence, proof. But all I could think was that I needed to make it stop. I ran to the fireplace, looked at the carved rules again. Never answer the 7th knock. I hadn't answered. I'd followed the rules exactly, but as I stood there, hands still pressed over my ears against the screaming, I realized my mistake. The 7th knock hadn't been for me. It had been an answer. Something else in the house had completed the pattern, had knocked that 7th time, and by staying silent, by not acknowledging it, I'd broken a rule I hadn't known existed. The fingers emerging from the walls were pulling now, tearing the plaster away in chunks, widening the gaps. Behind them, I caught glimpses of faces. Children's faces, pale and wrong, pressed together in the spaces between the walls, like sardines in a can. They weren't screaming anymore. They were smiling, and they were climbing through. I grabbed my car keys and ran, made it to the front door before the children reached me. Felt small hands grab my jacket, my hair, cold fingers that smelled like mold and old wood. I tore away, leaving fabric and strands of hair in their grip, and burst through the door into the November night. My car was gone. The driveway was empty. I looked back at the house. Every window was full of faces now. Children pressed against the glass, dozens of them, more than could possibly fit in those rooms. They were still smiling. One of them waved. I ran. Down the driveway, onto the road, into the darkness between the walnut trees. Behind me, I heard the front door open. Heard many small feet on the porch steps. Heard laughter, high and sweet, and completely wrong. I ran for 3 hours through those mountains. Didn't stop until I reached a highway, until I saw headlights, until I flagged down a truck driver who took one look at my face and called the police. They found the house empty, completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, no evidence anyone had lived there in decades. The cameras I'd set up were gone. The carved text above the fireplace was gone. Even my grandmother's bedroom was empty. The headboard with its 65 tally marks nowhere to be found. The police said I'd had a breakdown. Grief does strange things, they said. Makes you see things that aren't there. They found my car in an impound lot in Boone. It had been towed 2 weeks earlier for parking violations. I'd never driven it to the house at all, but I remember the knocking, the screaming, the children in the walls, and I remember what I found when I checked into a motel that night, when I finally looked at myself in a mirror for the first time since running from that house. There was something carved into my forearm, shallow letters filled with dried blood, like someone had etched them with a fingernail while I slept. 65 tally marks, and below them, new text. Your turn. Knock 3 times. Wait 3 breaths. Knock twice more. Never knock 6 times. Never answer the 7th knock. The knocking started that night at 2:47 in the morning. 3 sharp raps on the motel room wall. I knocked back. I had to. The rules were in my skin now, carved into my flesh. Part of me. 3 times. 3 breaths. Twice more. 5 knocks answered. Then a 6th. Then a 7th. I didn't answer. Stayed silent. Followed the rules exactly. The screaming started. It's been 68 nights now. I've carved my own tally marks to keep count, on the wall beside wherever bed I'm sleeping in. Different motels, different towns, trying to stay ahead of something I can't outrun. Every night at 2:47, the knocking starts. Every night, I respond with the pattern. Every night, something knocks back 7 times, and every night, when I don't answer that 7th knock, the screaming gets a little louder. The fingers pushing through the walls get a little further. The children in the spaces between get a little closer. I don't know what happens when they finally reach me. I don't know what happened to my grandmother at the bottom of those stairs, what she saw that made her face freeze in recognition. But I'm going to find out, because I counted wrong last night. I knocked 4 times instead of 3, and tonight, when the knocking starts, something different is going to answer back. The game has new rules now, and I don't think I'm playing anymore. The portraits showed how we were going to die, and they got more detailed every day. We found them in the dining room of the Bell House on Spruce Street, a sagging Victorian in Yancey County that my wife Hannah and I bought for $48,000 on September 20th, 2023. We were renovating it ourselves, planning to live there while we worked. It was supposed to be our fresh start, our escape from the rental apartments and the soul-crushing jobs and the feeling that our lives were happening to us instead of being lived. The portraits were under wallpaper in the dining room. Hannah discovered them while stripping the walls. She'd pulled away a section of faded floral print, and underneath, painted directly onto the plaster, were 4 portraits. Oil paintings, detailed and beautifully done, showing a family of 4, father, mother, daughter, son. They looked maybe turn of the century, based on the clothing, formal and posed like old photographs brought to life. "They're incredible," Hannah said, running her fingers along the edge of one painting. "We should keep them, restore them. This is craftsmanship you don't see anymore." I agreed. They were beautiful, haunting in a way I couldn't quite articulate. The faces were so detailed, you could see individual eyelashes, the texture of skin, the light reflecting in their eyes. But there was something in those eyes that bothered me. They didn't look at each other, or at the viewer. They were looking past the frame, at something behind whoever was observing them. We carefully removed the rest of the wallpaper, revealing all 4 portraits in their entirety. They were life-sized, positioned around the room like the family was sitting at an invisible table. The father's painting had a small brass plate at the bottom with text too tarnished to read. Hannah cleaned it with polish. It read, "Thomas Bell, 1889. We are what we will be." The next morning, the portraits had changed. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would make you certain something was wrong. But the father's eyes were different. They weren't looking past the frame anymore. They were looking slightly to the left, toward where Hannah had been standing the night before when we'd gone to bed. "Did you touch these?" I asked her. "No. Why?" I pointed at the father's gaze. His eyes. They're pointing a different direction. Hannah studied the portrait for a long moment. Shook her head. "They look the same to me." "You're seeing things, Mark. Maybe I was." We'd been working 16-hour days on the renovation, stripping floors and rewiring outlets and tearing out water-damaged drywall. Exhaustion does strange things to perception. But that night, I took a photo of each portrait before we went to bed. Documentation, just in case. The next morning, I compared my photos to the portraits. They'd all changed. The father was now looking directly at where Hannah slept on the couch in the living room. The mother's hand position had shifted. Instead of resting in her lap, her fingers were extended toward the doorway. The daughter's mouth, which had been closed in a slight smile, was now slightly open. The son's portrait showed the most dramatic change. He was bleeding from his nose, a thin trickle of red running down to his chin. The blood looked wet, fresh. Hannah thought I was having a breakdown, showed me the photos, told me they looked identical to the current portraits. When I pointed out the blood on the son's face, she looked at me with the kind of concern you give someone who's not quite tracking with reality. "Mark, there's no blood. It's paint. It's always been paint." But I could see it. Could see the difference between the photographs and what was on the wall. The portraits were changing, updating, showing us something. I looked at the brass plate again. "We are what we will be." That night, I stayed up, sat in the dining room with every light on, watching the portraits. Hannah went to bed angry, muttering about stress and exhaustion and how I needed to sleep before I completely lost it. At 3:22 in the morning, I saw it happen. The paint moved, not like dripping or running. The pigments shifted, rearranged themselves, the colors flowing like oil on water. The father's face aged slightly, lines appearing around his eyes that hadn't been there before. The mother's dress changed color from deep blue to dark gray. The daughter's hair grew longer, falling past her shoulders. The son's blood spread further down his face, and all 4 of them in perfect synchronization turned their eyes toward me. I fell out of my chair, scrambled backwards, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The portraits stared at me with expressions that had shifted from formal blankness to something else, something like pity. The son's mouth opened. Paint dripped from his lips as they formed words I could somehow hear, despite no sound in the room. "We are what we will be, and you will be what we are." I ran, woke up Hannah, told her we needed to leave immediately. She fought me, argued, demanded to know what was wrong. When I dragged her to the dining room to show her, the portraits looked normal again. No moving paint, no blood, just 4 beautiful, static paintings of a family that died over a century ago. "You need to see a doctor," Hannah said. "This isn't normal. You're hallucinating." Maybe I was, but I took more photos, set up my phone to record video, pointed it at the portraits, and let it run while we slept. The next morning, I checked the footage. 8 hours of video. Nothing moved. The portraits stayed exactly the same for the entire recording. But when I looked at the actual portraits on the wall, they'd changed again. Now the father was holding something in his hands. A rope. The mother's dress was torn. The son's blood had spread to cover most of his face, and his eyes were closed. And behind all four of them, barely visible in the background that had been dark and empty before, there was a house. Our house, the Bell house, painted in miniature behind each figure, with windows that glowed like eyes. Hannah couldn't see any of it. To her, the portraits looked exactly as they had the first day, beautiful, static, unchanged. She thought I was having a mental health crisis, made an appointment with a psychiatrist, talked about going back to our apartment in Asheville, putting the renovation on hold until I was better, but I knew what was happening. The portraits weren't showing the past. They were showing the future. Our future. And with each change, they were getting more detailed, more specific, more inevitable. I found the family's death records at the county courthouse. Thomas Bell died the 15th of November, 1889, aged 43. Cause of death, hanging. Elizabeth Bell died the 15th of November, 1889, aged 40. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Sarah Bell died the 15th of November, 1889, aged 12. Cause of death, blood loss from traumatic amputation. Jacob Bell died the 14th of November, 1889, aged 9. Cause of death, hemorrhage. They'd all died in the house. In a murder-suicide, the father had killed his children, his wife, then himself. The newspaper articles from 1889 were graphic. The father had gone mad over the course of 3 months, claiming he could see the future, claiming God was showing him what was going to happen. He tried to save his family from fates worse than death by ending them quickly. His final note, reprinted in the newspaper. We are what we will be. I have seen it. I have changed it. They are better now. I understood. The portraits weren't predicting our future. They were prescribing it, showing us how we were meant to die, programming reality through paint and belief, and some twisted mechanism that had infected this house over a century ago. I tried to destroy them, took a hammer to the walls, but the plaster wouldn't break. The hammer bounced off like I was hitting steel. I tried to paint over them, but the paint wouldn't stick. It beaded up and ran off like water on wax. I tried to burn them with lighter fluid, but the flames wouldn't catch, guttering out the instant they touched the portraits. And with each attempt, they got more detailed. Now the father was hanging from a beam, his neck broken, his face purple. The mother was lying on the floor with her head caved in. The daughter was holding her left hand, the stumps of her missing fingers clearly visible, blood pooling around her. The son was collapsed with blood covering his entire face and chest, and in each portrait, standing in the background beside that miniature version of the house, were 2 new figures. Modern clothing, a man and a woman. Me and Hannah, we are what we will be, the son's portrait whispered when I was alone in the room. And you will be what we are. The house demands it. The pattern demands it. 4 before. 4 now. 4 always. Hannah found me in the dining room at 2 in the morning, standing in front of the portraits with a rope in my hands. I don't remember getting the rope. Don't remember taking it from the garage or bringing it inside. But there I was, holding it, and some part of my brain was calculating the load-bearing capacity of the ceiling beams, figuring out which one would hold my weight. She got me out of the house. Called my brother, who drove up from Charlotte and helped us pack a bag. We left everything else, the furniture, the tools, the renovation dreams, just got in the car and drove away from Spruce Street, from Yancey County, from the Bell House and its portraits and its predetermined future. We're living with my brother now. Hannah thinks we escaped, thinks distance and time will make whatever happened fade into a bad memory. She started looking at new houses, places we can start over for real this time. But I know better, because 2 nights ago, I woke up at 3:22 in the morning, the exact time the portraits had first moved, and saw something on the wall of my brother's guest room. A patch of the wallpaper had darkened, the pattern fading, and underneath I could see the ghost of something emerging, a portrait, just beginning to form, oil paint on plaster, showing a man who looked like me, standing in this room, holding a rope. I checked Hannah's side of the bed. She was sleeping, peaceful, unaware, but on the wall above her, another dark patch was forming, another portrait emerging, showing a woman who looked like her, lying on the floor, her head at an impossible angle. "We are what we will be," something whispered in the darkness. "Distance doesn't matter. Time doesn't matter. The pattern is set. 4 before, 4 now, 4 always." My brother has 2 children, a daughter and a son, ages 12 and 9. I can see their portraits forming on the walls of their bedrooms, the paint bleeding through the wallpaper, the images getting clearer every night. The daughter is missing, fingers on her left hand. The son is bleeding from his nose, his face covered in red, his eyes closed. Hannah still can't see them. My brother thinks I'm having a relapse. They're talking about medication, about intensive therapy, about how trauma can manifest in strange ways. But I can see the portraits getting more detailed, more specific, more inevitable. We are what we will be. The Bell House wasn't the beginning. It was just one iteration in a pattern that's been playing out for longer than I can trace. 4 deaths, always the same configuration, always the same sequence. The pattern moves through houses, through families, through anyone who sees the portraits and understands what they're showing. The rope is in my car trunk. I don't remember putting it there, but I check every morning, and every morning it's there, waiting. The portraits tell me exactly which beam to use, exactly what time, exactly how to make the deaths quick and clean, and better than whatever other future is supposed to happen. Hannah found my notes yesterday. The ones where I've been documenting the portrait's changes, tracking the pattern, trying to understand if there's a way to break the cycle. She cried, held me, told me we'd get through this together, but her portrait is almost complete now. I can see every detail of her face, frozen in that final moment. I can see the grief in my own portrait, the resignation, the understanding that this is how it has to be. We are what we will be. Tonight is November 15th, 134 years to the day since the Bell family died. The portraits are complete now. I can see all 4 of us, can see exactly how it happens, exactly what sequence, exactly what time. 3:22 in the morning. Hannah is sleeping. My brother and his children are sleeping. The rope is in the trunk. The beam is load rated for 300 pounds. The portraits show me everything I need to know. We are what we will be. And I will be what Thomas Bell was. The house demands it. The pattern demands it. 4 before, 4 now, 4 always. The well was drinking my blood, and I could hear it swallowing. I discovered the well on October 28th, 2023, while clearing brush behind the house I'd inherited from my aunt in Mitchell County. The property was 16 acres of steep Appalachian hillside, thick with laurel and oak. The house a squat stone structure built into the slope like it was trying to burrow into the mountain. Aunt Miriam had died alone in that house at 78, and it took them 5 weeks to find her body. The lawyer said she'd left everything to me because I was the only family member who'd visited her more than once. I wish I hadn't. The well was hidden under a decade of overgrowth. Virginia creeper and poison ivy woven so thick they formed a living roof. I only found it because I'd tripped over the stone rim, my leg breaking through the vegetation and into open air. When I pulled back the plants, I saw the well mouth maybe 4 feet across, lined with stacked fieldstone, disappearing into darkness that my flashlight couldn't penetrate. There was no safety grate, no cover, just an open hole in the ground that someone had deliberately hidden under years of unchecked growth. I dropped a rock down the shaft, counted, got to 18 before I heard the splash. Deep, very deep, too deep for a hand-dug well in this terrain. Something echoed back up the shaft, not the sound of the splash, but something else. A voice, maybe. A word I almost recognized but couldn't quite make out. It sounded like my name. I should have filled it in, should have called someone to pump it full of concrete and make it safe. But I was curious about the well, about why my aunt had hidden it, about what was down there that needed to be concealed. I set up a pulley system with rope from the hardware store, rigged a camping lantern to a carabiner, and lowered it into the well. The light descended slowly, illuminating stone walls that were slick with moisture, and something else patterns etched into the rock, not random scratches, deliberate carvings, spiraling down the shaft in a continuous line of symbols I didn't recognize. The lantern reached water at 120 feet, far deeper than any well needed to be. The light bobbed on the surface for a moment, then something pulled it under, not grabbed, pulled, like the water itself had reached up and dragged the lantern down. The rope went slack in my hands, and when I pulled it up, the carabiner was still attached. But the lantern was gone, and the metal clip was hot, fever hot, like it had been held in a fire. I looked down into the well. The darkness looked back. That night, I heard the well calling me. Not literally. No voices, no whispers. But I woke up at 3:37 in the morning with an overwhelming urge to go outside, to walk through the October cold to the well, to look down into that darkness and see what was looking back. I found myself standing at the back door in my pajamas, hand on the knob. Before I fully woke up and realized what I was doing, I locked the door, pushed a chair under the knob, went back to bed and didn't sleep. The next morning, there were muddy footprints on the back porch, bare feet, too small to be mine, maybe child-sized, or a small woman's. They led from the woods to the door, then stopped, like someone had walked out of the forest, stood at my door, then vanished, or gone back the way they came. I followed the prints into the woods. They led straight to the well, then continued over the stone rim and down into darkness. Impossible, but there they were, muddy footprints on the vertical stone wall, defying gravity, walking down into the depths. I found my aunt's journals that afternoon, hidden in the attic in a metal box behind the insulation. 17 notebooks, dating back 30 years, filled with her handwriting. The entries started normal enough, garden notes, weather observations, complaints about her arthritis. But around year 5, they changed. The well is thirsty again. I can feel it pulling at me when I sleep. Have to be careful. Have to remember the rules. Fed it properly today. 3 drops, no more. It was satisfied. The dream stopped for now. The symbols are important. I've been studying them, trying to understand. They're not random. They're a formula, a recipe, for keeping something contained. The final entry was dated 2 days before she died. I'm too old to keep feeding it. Too tired. It's getting hungrier. I can hear it calling other people now, people from town, trying to lure them here. I should have filled it in years ago, should have let it starve. But I was afraid of what it would do if I stopped, afraid it would come up. Underneath, in different handwriting, shaky, barely legible, was one more line. I'm sorry. It's your problem now. I understood then. The thing in the well wasn't just living there. It was trapped there, contained by the symbols carved into the stone, held in place by some ritual my aunt had been maintaining for decades. And now she was dead, and whatever she'd been doing to keep it satisfied had stopped. The dream started that night. I was standing at the well in darkness, looking down into it, and something was climbing up the stone walls toward me, moving with a wet, sliding sound that made my teeth ache. It was made of water and shadow and hunger, and it knew my name because my aunt had told it my name, had offered me as replacement, as the next keeper, as the next person who would feed it and maintain the symbols and keep it from coming all the way up. I woke up with dirt under my fingernails, mud on my feet, standing in my backyard in 3:37 in the morning, 5 feet from the well's edge. I'd been walking in my sleep, walking toward the well, and if I'd taken 3 more steps, I would have walked right over the edge and fallen 120 feet into water that pulled things under and kept them. I ran inside, packed a bag, got in my car. I was done. The property wasn't worth this. Whatever my aunt had been dealing with, whatever agreement she'd made with the thing in that well, I wanted no part of it. My car wouldn't start. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, like something was preventing combustion. I tried for 20 minutes before giving up, called a tow truck. They couldn't find the house. I gave them the address 3 times, walked them through the directions, but they said their GPS showed nothing at that location, said the road I claimed to be on didn't exist. I was trapped. I spent the day researching old property records, geological surveys, anything that might explain what the well was and how to deal with it. I found a survey from 1867 that mentioned the old well on this property. Old even then, predating the house, predating most European settlement in these mountains. There was a note in Cherokee language, translated in the margin, "Where the thirsty one sleeps, do not wake it, do not feed it, let it dream forever." But my aunt had woken it, or someone before her had, and now it was awake and hungry and climbing. That night, I heard scratching on my bedroom window, looked out, and saw a child standing in my yard. A girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a white dress that was soaking wet. She was staring up at my window with eyes that reflected light wrong, too bright, too silver, like animal eyes in headlights. She pointed toward the woods, toward the well. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. "Feed it! Feed it! Feed it!" I closed the curtains, turned on every light in the house. The scratching continued for hours, moving from window to window, sometimes high up where no child could reach. Sometimes the scratching came from inside the walls. At 3:37 in the morning, I woke up standing at the well's edge again. But this time I hadn't walked there in my sleep. This time I'd been dragged. I could see the gouges in the ground where my heels had dug in, the dirt pushed up behind me in furrows. My pajama shirt was torn, and there were bruises on my arms in the shape of small handprints. The wet child was standing on the other side of the well, directly across from me. This close, I could see she wasn't really a child. The proportions were wrong, the joints bent at angles that didn't match human anatomy. Her wet dress wasn't cloth, it was water, constantly flowing down her body but never dripping off, returning somehow to its source. "Feed it," she said, and her voice came from the well, echoing up from those depths. 3 drops of blood. Once every 3 days. That's all it needs. Such a small price for such a big protection. Protection from what? She smiled. Her teeth were stones, smooth river rocks, tumbled and white. From itself, from coming all the way up, from taking what it needs instead of accepting what it's given. She stepped onto the well's stone rim, stood on the edge, balanced on that narrow ring of rock, and began to walk around the circumference. Your aunt was smart. She understood. Feed it a little, or it will feed on everything. 3 drops. So simple, so easy. What is it? Thirst, pure thirst, older than the mountains, deeper than the stone. It was here before the Cherokee, before humans, before things had names, and it will be hereafter. She completed her circuit of the well, standing across from me again. Your aunt kept it satisfied for 30 years. Now it's your turn. And if I refuse? The wet child cocked her head. Water ran from her hair but never seemed to diminish. Then it stops asking nicely, stops sending messengers, stops waiting. It comes up all the way, and it drinks the entire mountain dry. Everything with blood, everything with water, everything with life. She stepped off the rim and sank into the ground like it was liquid, disappearing without disturbing the dirt. I was alone in the darkness, standing at the well's edge, understanding that I'd inherited more than property. I'd inherited a responsibility, a burden, a feeding schedule for something that shouldn't exist. I went inside and got a sewing needle, pricked my finger, counted out 3 drops of blood and let them fall into a cup of water. I carried the cup to the well and poured it in. I heard swallowing, a deep, wet sound of something drinking. The sound echoed up from depths that went farther than stone and water, echoing from somewhere else entirely. The well sighed, satisfied. For now, that was 6 weeks ago. I've fed it 8 times since then. 3 drops of blood mixed with water, poured into the well every 3 days, like feeding a pet, like maintaining a furnace, like paying rent to something that owns this property in ways no deed could ever transfer. My car starts now. The GPS works. I could leave any time I want, but I understand what my aunt understood. If I leave, if I stop feeding it, the thing in the well will climb all the way up, down the mountain, into the valleys, drinking from everything alive until there's nothing left but dry husks and empty vessels. 3 drops of blood. Such a small price. But the well is getting hungrier. I can feel it. Last feeding, it took longer to swallow, took longer to sigh in satisfaction. 3 drops aren't enough anymore, and last night, the wet child appeared in my bedroom. "Feed it more," she said. "Feed it better. Blood from your finger isn't enough. It needs blood from your vein. It needs volume, quantity. It needs you to understand that hunger grows, that thirst increases, that all debts eventually come due." I looked at my aunt's journals again, read more carefully this time. She'd started with 3 drops. By year 10, she was feeding it a cup. By year 20, a quart. The final year, she was feeding it a gallon every 3 days, draining herself to the edge of death, then recovering just enough to feed it again. It killed her. Not directly, but the drain, the constant loss, the anemia. Her death certificate said natural causes, but I know better. She died because the well drank her dry over 30 years, one feeding at a time, until there wasn't enough left to keep her heart beating. Now it's my turn. 3 drops today, a cup tomorrow, a gallon in a decade. How much will it demand in 20 years? 30? How long until I'm the one they find dead in this house, drained and empty, with no one to inherit the responsibility? I tried to research other solutions, tried to find someone who understood what this was and how to stop it. But everyone I talk to says the same thing. You can't stop thirst. You can only satisfy it, temporarily, feed it or let it free. Those are my options, and I think about that second choice more and more. About walking away, about letting the well drink the mountain dry, letting it spread, letting it become someone else's problem. A bigger problem, an unfixable problem. But then I remember the wet child's words. Everything with blood, everything with water, everything with life. How many people live in these mountains? How far would it spread before it satisfied itself? Would it ever be satisfied? So I feed it. 3 drops today. Tomorrow, I'll need a larger needle. Next week, maybe a syringe. Next month, a proper blood draw setup. I'm learning first aid, learning phlebotomy, learning how to drain myself efficiently without dying, becoming my aunt, becoming the next keeper, becoming the thing that stands between the thirsty one and the world. And sometimes, at 3:37 in the morning, I stand at the well's edge and look down into that darkness and think about jumping, about letting it have me all at once, about ending the slow drain and the constant fear and the responsibility I never asked for. But the wet child told me something else the last time she appeared. Told me what happens to people who fall into the well. They don't die. They join the thirst. They become part of what's down there, dissolved and distributed. Their consciousness spread through water and hunger and ancient darkness. They become messengers, attractors, the things that lure others to the well's edge, like her. Like all the other shapes I see sometimes, standing at the forest's edge, dripping and smiling and pointing toward the well. They were all keepers once. They all fed it, and when they couldn't feed it anymore, when their bodies gave out, or their minds broke, or their will failed, they fell, or jumped, or were pulled, and now they serve it from the inside. I won't jump. I won't fall. I'll keep feeding it. 3 drops, a cup, a quart, a gallon, however much it takes, for as long as I can give it, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is becoming the wet child, is standing at someone else's window, scratching with fingers made of water, whispering, "Feed it, feed it, feed it," until the next keeper understands that this is forever. This is the price. This is the inheritance. This is what it means to own property in these mountains, where things older than civilization sleep in the deep places, where thirst never dies, where wells go down and down and down forever. The well is mine now. I belong to it, and in 20 years, when I'm too weak to keep feeding it, when my blood isn't enough anymore, I'll have to find someone else, someone who will inherit this house, this responsibility, this curse. Maybe I'll have a niece, or a nephew, someone who visits me more than once, someone who shows kindness to a crazy old woman living alone in the mountains, someone I can leave everything to, someone the well can drink. 3 drops, That's all it takes to start. Just 3 drops. The widow's walk was full of widows, and they were waiting for me to join them. I first saw them through binoculars on November 11th, 2023, while standing in the yard of the Gentry House, a 3-story monstrosity in Avery County that I was appraising for a bank foreclosure. The house sat on a bare hilltop like a rotten tooth, gray clapboards peeling, windows dark, but it was the widow's walk that caught my attention. The railed platform on the roof, a New England feature that made no sense this far inland, this deep in the mountains. There were women standing on it, 7 of them, pressed against the railing, all wearing black, all completely still, all staring down at me. I lowered the binoculars, blinked, looked again with naked eyes. I raised the binoculars, 7 women in black, staring. I didn't go inside the house that day, took photos from the yard, wrote my report from the car, and recommended the bank demolish the structure. Too much damage, too many problems, too isolated to sell. The property wasn't worth the cost of repairs. The bank called 3 days later. They'd rejected my recommendation. They wanted a full interior appraisal, wanted me to go inside, document everything, provide a detailed assessment, and they wanted it done before November 20th, some deadline related to the foreclosure process. I should have refused, should have said I was too busy, should have recommended another appraiser. But the bank was my biggest client, and I'd been doing this job for 12 years without ever letting personal discomfort interfere with professional duty. I went back on November 14th, brought my camera, my measuring tape, my clipboard, brought a flashlight because the power was off, brought a hammer because the front door was nailed shut. Someone had boarded it up from the outside, overlapping planks of wood secured with 20-penny nails. I pried the boards loose and went inside. The house was wrong immediately. Not just abandoned wrong, but geometrically wrong. The front hallway should have been straight, leading to a staircase at the back, but it curved. Not sharply, just gradually enough that I couldn't see the far end. The walls weren't parallel. The floor sloped in a direction that didn't match the hill's grade. Every room I entered felt like it was rotated slightly off-axis from the previous one, like the house was a spiral instead of a stack of rectangular floors. I found the stairs to the 2nd floor, counted 23 steps, too many. The ceiling height didn't justify that many steps, but there they were, each one slightly narrower than the last, like they were converging toward a point at the top. The 2nd floor had 6 bedrooms, all empty except for water damage and rot, all with windows that looked out on views that didn't match one. Window showed forest, another showed bare hilltop, another showed a town that wasn't there when I looked from outside. I found the ladder to the widow's walk in the last bedroom. A wooden ladder, built into the wall, leading up through a hatch in the ceiling. The rungs were worn smooth in the centers, like many hands had climbed this ladder over many years. I didn't want to climb it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to get out of this house and never come back. But I needed access to the roof for the appraisal, needed to document the condition of the shingles, the flashing, the structural integrity. I climbed. The hatch opened onto the widow's walk, a square platform maybe 10 feet to a side, surrounded by a railing that came up to my chest. The view was incredible, mountains in every direction, rolling away in layers of blue-gray ridges. The November sky was white with high clouds, the air cold enough to burn my lungs. And I was alone. No women in black, no one at all. But there were marks on the railing, wear patterns, smooth depressions in the wood where hands had gripped for so long they'd worn grooves. 7 positions around the railing, 7 smooth spots, shaped like hands, worn deep into the wood. I photographed them, measured them, documented the entire widow's walk in professional detail. Then I climbed back down, feeling relieved in a way I couldn't articulate. I was on the ground floor, heading for the front door, when I heard singing, female voices, high and thin, coming from above, from the widow's walk. I shouldn't have gone back, should have walked out the door and kept walking, but the sound pulled at something in me, curiosity, professional obligation, the need to understand what I was hearing. I climbed back up. The widow's walk was full of women now. 7 of them, crowded onto that small platform, all wearing black dresses that looked old-fashioned, high-necked and long-sleeved. They were pressed against the railing in those 7 worn spots, hands gripping the wood exactly where the grooves were deepest. They were all looking out at the mountains, away from me, singing in harmony a hymn I almost recognized, something about waiting and watching and faithfulness unto death. "Hello?" I said. They stopped singing. All 7 heads turned toward me in perfect unison. Their faces were wrong, not disfigured or monstrous, but wrong in a way that made my brain refuse to process what it was seeing. Too many features, or too few. Eyes in places eyes shouldn't be, mouths that were vertical instead of horizontal, faces that seemed to shift and reconfigure every time I tried to focus on them. "You came up," one of them said. Her voice was normal, pleasant even. "We've been waiting, we've been watching. We knew you'd come up eventually. Who are you?" "Widows," they said in unison. "We're waiting for our husbands to come home from the sea." "There's no sea here. This is the mountains." "The sea is everywhere," another one said. "The sea is everything. Water above and water below, and water in between. We're waiting on the widow's walk, like good wives do. Waiting forever." I backed toward the hatch. My hand found the ladder. "You can't leave yet," the first woman said. "You haven't chosen your spot. You haven't learned your position. How will you wait if you don't know where to stand?" "I'm not waiting for anything. I'm appraising this house. I'm doing my job." "We all had jobs," a third woman said. "We all had reasons to come up here. We all thought we'd go back down." She smiled with a mouth that was sideways across her face. "But the widow's walk doesn't let go. Once you come up, you're waiting. Once you start watching, you can't stop." I climbed down the ladder. Fast. Reckless. My hands slipped twice, and I nearly fell. Behind me, I heard them singing again, that same hymn about waiting and watching. I ran through the house. The hallways were longer than before, the rooms more numerous. I passed doorways I hadn't seen on the way in, staircases that led to floors that shouldn't exist. The house had changed, or I'd gotten turned around, or reality had stopped being consistent. I finally found a window on the ground floor and broke it with my hammer, climbed through, ran to my car. The women were on the widow's walk, visible now even without binoculars. 7 figures in black, pressed against the railing, watching me drive away. I wrote my report that night. Recommended immediate demolition, listed structural issues, code violations, unsafe conditions, added a note about possible squatters, though I didn't describe what I'd seen. The bank wouldn't have believed me. They rejected the recommendation again, said they needed a more thorough inspection, said I'd missed several rooms, that my floor count didn't match the property records, said I needed to go back. I refused. Told them I was done with that property. They could hire someone else. 3 days later, my business partner Sarah called me from the Gentry house. She'd taken the job when I refused it. She was on the widow's walk. She'd found something I needed to see. "There are 8 spots now," she said. Her voice was strange, distant. 8 worn places on the railing. "I found your spot. It's right here between 2 of the women. They saved it for you. Get out of there, Sarah. Climb down and leave." "I can't. I tried. The ladder goes up, but when I try to climb down, I'm just climbing up again. Up and up in a loop. There's no down anymore. Just up. Just the widow's walk. Just waiting." I called the police. Begged them to send someone to the Gentry house. They said they'd do a welfare check. Called me back an hour later and said there was no one there. No car. No evidence anyone had been there recently. But I can see her. When I drive past the house, I've driven past it 14 times now. I can't stop myself. I can see 8 figures on the widow's walk, 8 women in black, pressed against the railing, staring out at the mountains, and one of them is Sarah. I recognize her coat, her hair, her posture, but she's been there for 6 days now, standing in the same position, never moving, never climbing down. I called her cell phone. She answered on the 3rd ring. "I'm waiting," she said. "We're all waiting. For our husbands to come home from the sea. They've been gone so long. But we're patient. We're faithful. Sarah, there's no sea. Your husband works in Charlotte. He's not at sea. The sea is everywhere. The sea is everything. Come up and wait with us. Come up and take your spot." I hung up, blocked her number, tried to move on. But last night, I found marks on my own railing. I live in a ranch house. No second floor. No widow's walk. Just a simple deck with a wooden railing overlooking my backyard. The railing has wear marks now. Smooth depressions where hands have gripped so long they've worn grooves. 7 positions around the deck. 7 smooth spots, shaped like hands I recognize. And I know if I stand at that railing, if I grip it in the right spot, if I stare out at my suburban yard and wait, eventually the yard will become mountains. The mountains will become water. The water will become everything. And I'll be waiting. Waiting forever on a widow's walk that exists everywhere and nowhere. Waiting for something to come home from a sea that drowned the world a long time ago. I can feel the pull. The need to go outside. To stand at the railing. To take my position among the widows and wait. Sarah calls every night now. Same time, 3:47 in the morning. She doesn't speak anymore. Just stands on the widow's walk with the other women, her phone to her ear, breathing, waiting. And I understand what will happen if I answer. If I listen too long, if I let her pull me across that distance between her widow's walk and mine, I'll climb. Up through my house that will change around me, that will grow floors and stairs and geometry that doesn't exist. Up to a widow's walk that has always been on my roof, waiting for me to find it. Up to a place where 8 women stand, where there's room for one more, where my spot is already worn smooth by hands that haven't gripped it yet, but will grip it forever once they start. The sea is everywhere. The sea is everything, and the widows are waiting, waiting for me to come home. The children were made of smoke, and they were learning how to become solid. I moved into the Harker House in Haywood County on October 1st, 2023, a low-slung cabin built into the side of a mountain, surrounded by Fraser firs, so thick the ground was permanently shadowed. The house was cheap because something had happened there in 1974, something the realtor described as a tragedy, without providing details. I was broke enough not to care. The smoke appeared the first night I lit a fire in the stone fireplace. Normal at first gray smoke rising from burning oak logs, spiraling up the chimney like it should. But then it began to move wrong, swirling in patterns that didn't match the air currents, forming shapes that lingered a beat too long before dispersing, and the shapes looked like children. Small figures, maybe 4 feet tall, made entirely of smoke. I could see through them to the fireplace stones beyond, but they had definition heads, bodies, arms, legs, smoke twisted into suggestion of faces, eyes like darker voids in the gray, mouths that opened and closed, exhaling streams of smoke that might have been words. There were 3 of them. They stood in the living room for maybe 5 seconds, staring at me with those void eyes, before the draft from the window pulled them apart. They dissolved into formless smoke and were sucked toward the chimney. I didn't sleep, sat on the couch with every light on, telling myself it was pareidolia, pattern recognition gone haywire. My brain seeing faces in smoke the same way people see faces in clouds or wood grain. But I'd seen them move. I'd seen them look at me. And I'd seen them stand in positions that defied how smoke should behave, holding form despite the air currents, maintaining coherence despite the laws of physics that should have scattered them instantly. The next morning, I researched the house's history at the Waynesville Library, found what the realtor hadn't told me in the Canton newspaper archives from November 1974. Mountain tragedy. Claims 3 children. The Harker family father Ronald, mother Patricia, and 3 children aged 6, 8, and 10 had lived in the house I'd just moved into. On November 3rd, 1974, while the parents were in town, a fire started in the fireplace. The flue had been closed. The smoke had nowhere to go but into the house. The 3 children died of smoke inhalation. They were found in the living room, collapsed in front of the fireplace, like they'd been trying to open the flue but couldn't reach it. The parents had moved away immediately. The house sat empty for 49 years until I bought it. I didn't light another fire, kept the house cold, used electric heaters even though they barely made a dent in the mountain chill, avoided the fireplace entirely. But the smoke children found another way out. I woke up on the third night to find smoke pouring from my electric heater. Not burning plastic smoke, clean, gray wood smoke. Impossible. But there it was, billowing out of the heating element in thick streams. 3 children formed in the smoke, more solid this time, more defined. I could see details I'd missed before the suggestion of hair, of clothing, of fingers on their hands. They stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me with eyes that were almost real. One of them opened its mouth. Smoke poured out, forming shapes in the air. Letters, maybe. Or words in a language I didn't know. The smoke words hung in the air for a moment, before dissolving. Then all 3 children reached toward me. Their hands were still smoke, still translucent, still governed by fluid dynamics that made their fingers swirl and dissipate. But when they touched my blanket, the fabric moved, just slightly, just enough to prove that smoke with enough intention could affect solid matter. They were getting stronger. I ran from the bedroom, locked myself in the bathroom, heard them moving through the house, a sound like wind through trees, like breath through a straw, like something that was almost alive, learning how to be more than almost. By morning, they were gone, but my bed was covered in a fine layer of soot, and the pattern it made looked like 3 small bodies had been lying there, pressed against the fabric, trying to understand what solid felt like. I called a chimney sweep, a man named Dockery, who'd been cleaning chimneys in these mountains for 40 years. He climbed up on the roof, inspected the flue, came back down, shaking his head. "Flue's clear now," he said. But it wasn't always. Someone closed it at some point, sealed it shut from the outside with cement. Had to be deliberate. He looked at me with eyes that had seen things he didn't discuss. "This the Harker place?" "Yes." "You've been seeing smoke inside the house?" "Smoke that doesn't act right." I nodded. Dockery packed up his tools without saying anything else. At his truck, he turned back. "Those children died in the smoke. They became smoke, and now they're trying to become something else. Something solid, something that can touch the world again. How do I stop them?" "You don't. You either let them finish becoming, or you leave before they decide you're the material they need to build themselves out of." He drove away. I stood in the yard, looking at the house, trying to decide what to do. That night, I lit a fire. If smoke was the medium they used, maybe I could communicate with them. Maybe I could help them, or reason with them, or at least understand what they wanted. The smoke formed immediately. 3 children, more solid than ever before. I could see their faces clearly now, 2 boys and a girl, scared and confused and desperate. The girl was the oldest. She formed smoke words in the air. "Help us become." "Become what?" I asked. "Real. Alive. Solid. You're dead. You died in 1974. I can't make you alive." The middle child, one of the boys, formed different words. "We remember solid, remember warm, want to feel again." The youngest child just stared at me. His smoke eyes were full of something I recognized, desperation. He reached out, and this time when his hand touched my arm, I felt it, not solid, but not nothing. A coolness, a pressure, the sensation of something that wanted to be real pressing against the boundary between smoke and flesh. "We need material," the girl wrote. "Carbon, flesh, bone." I understood then what Dockery had been warning me about. They didn't just want to become solid. They wanted to become solid using me. My carbon, my flesh, my bones. They wanted to pull me apart at the molecular level and reconstruct themselves using the materials that made me real. I ran, not from the room, from the house, got in my car and drove to a motel in Canton. Stayed there for 3 days, trying to figure out what to do, but they found me anyway. Smoke started pouring from the motel's bathroom vent on the second night. 3 children formed, more solid than ever. I could barely see through them now. They were translucent instead of transparent, gray instead of white. They'd been practicing, gathering smoke from somewhere, building mass, learning how to hold form for longer periods. The girl spoke, not smoke words this time, actual sounds, formed by smoke vibrating in patterns that approximated human speech. You lit fire. You saw us. You belong to us. Now, I didn't agree to anything. I didn't make any deal. Smoke. See smoke. You breathed. Us. We're inside. You. Now. We can build from inside. I felt it then. Something in my lungs that shouldn't be there. A coldness. A presence. When I exhaled, gray smoke came out of my mouth. Not much. Just a wisp, but it formed a tiny hand in the air before dissipating. They were already inside me. Already beginning the process of transformation. Building themselves using my carbon. One breath at a time. I went to a hospital. Told the doctors I'd inhaled smoke. That I couldn't breathe right. That something was wrong. They ran tests. Found nothing. Clear lungs. Perfect oxygen saturation. No evidence of smoke inhalation at all. But I could feel them inside me. Growing. Solidifying. Using my body as raw material to reconstruct themselves. I went back to the house. What choice did I have? They were inside me now. Distance didn't matter. Running didn't matter. They would build themselves whether I was in the Harker house or anywhere else in the world. I lit a fire. The smoke children appeared, more solid than ever, almost opaque now, almost real. The girl had color in her cheeks. The boys had definition in their hair. They looked like actual children who happened to be slightly see-through, rather than smoke that happened to be shaped like children. How long? I asked. Soon, the girl said. Her voice was almost normal. Days. Maybe. Weeks. Depends. How much? You breathe. Will it kill me? She looked sad. Genuinely sad. We don't want to hurt you. But we need to become. We've been smoke for so long. 49 years of being nothing. 49 years of trying to hold form. We're so tired. I understood, pitied them even. 3 children who died because their parents forgot to open a flue, who'd become trapped in the smoke that killed them, who'd spent half a century as formless vapor, desperate to be solid again. But understanding didn't stop what was happening. Every breath I took now, smoke came out. Every day, I lost a little more substance. My weight dropped. My skin paled. I could see veins and bones that had never been visible before. The smoke children grew more solid, more real, more alive. It's been 6 weeks now. I've lost 40 pounds. My bones are visible through my skin. I can see through myself slightly translucent in the way smoke is translucent. The children are almost completely solid. They look like real kids now. Flesh and blood and bone, built from materials that used to be me. They can touch things, move things. They eat food I prepare for them, though I don't know if they need it or if they're just remembering what eating felt like. They're kind, grateful. They help me around the house, doing chores I'm too weak to do anymore. They read to me when I'm too tired to read myself. They're good children who died badly and are being born again through a process that's killing me by inches. I don't blame them. How can I? They didn't choose to die in smoke, didn't choose to be trapped as vapor for 49 years. They're just trying to become real again, and I'm the only material available. In another week, maybe 2, they'll be completely solid, and I'll be completely gone, transformed into smoke. My carbon and calcium and iron redistributed into 3 small bodies that desperately needed them. Will I be trapped as smoke the way they were? Will I spend the next 49 years as formless vapor, waiting for someone else to light a fire and breathe me in? Or will I just dissipate, scatter on the wind, become nothing? The children promise they'll remember me, promise they'll honor what I've given them, promise they'll live good lives with the flesh and bones that used to be mine. It's not enough, but it's all I have. Last night, the youngest child hugged me. He was solid enough that I felt his warmth, felt his heartbeat, a heart built from carbon that used to be my ribs, beating with blood built from iron that used to be mine. Thank you, he whispered, for becoming us. I'm writing this down before I forget how. My hands are translucent now. I can see through my fingers to the keys beneath them. Soon I won't be able to hold a pen or press a key. Soon I'll be smoke, and smoke can't write. To whoever finds this, don't light fires in the Harker house. Don't breathe the smoke. Don't let them inside you, unless you're willing to become what they need. Unless you're ready to unmake yourself so 3 dead children can learn to be alive again. The smoke is coming out of my mouth now, even when I don't exhale. I'm dissolving. The children are solid. They're real. They're alive. And I am smoke. The basement grew 3 feet deeper every night, and something was digging it from below. I inherited the Mosley house in Graham County on October 5th, 2023, a Victorian structure on Elm Street, narrow and tall, built in 1893. My great-aunt Cecilia had died there at 91 years old, alone in a house too big for one person, and her will left everything to me with one condition. I had to live in the house for a full year before I could sell it. The basement bothered me from the start. It was unfinished dirt floor, stone foundation walls, exposed floor joists above. But it felt wrong. Too large for the house's footprint. I measured it my second day there. 40 feet long, 30 feet wide. The basement was larger than the house above it. I told myself it was an illusion. Strange angles, poor lighting, my measurements off. Counting my steps, the numbers didn't change. The basement extended 10 feet beyond the house's exterior walls. Not possible, but undeniable. That night, I heard digging, rhythmic, steady. The sound of something moving earth, coming from below the basement, from beneath the foundation, from somewhere that shouldn't exist. I went downstairs with a flashlight. The basement looked normal, empty, except for an old furnace and 50 years of abandoned storage. But the sound was louder here. Definitely digging. Definitely below me. I found the marks the next morning. Scratches in the dirt floor, like something had dragged claws across it. They formed a pattern, a spiral, centered in the middle of the basement, maybe 6 feet across. The dirt inside the spiral was darker, looser, like it had been recently disturbed. I measured the basement again. 43 feet long now, 30 feet wide, 3 feet deeper overnight. I called a structural engineer, a woman named Patricia Sims who'd worked in these mountains for 30 years. She walked through the basement with a measuring tape and a frown that deepened with each measurement. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "The foundation footers are out here." She pointed at marks on the walls, but the actual floor extends way beyond them, and the ceiling height is wrong. This should be a 7-foot basement based on the house's grade, but it's 10 feet, as if 3 feet of dirt just vanished. Could the floor have collapsed, created a deeper space? Collapsed into what? There's no void beneath this. We're on bedrock, solid stone. She looked at me. Who dug this basement? Originally, I didn't know. The house was built in 1893. The basement had always been there, as far as any record showed. Patricia left without offering solutions, but she said something at the door that I didn't understand until later. My grandmother used to say some basements in these mountains aren't dug from above. They're opened from below. I always thought she was talking about sinkholes. She wasn't talking about sinkholes. That night, the digging was louder, more frantic, like whatever was working beneath the foundation had gotten closer and was hurrying to finish. I went down to the basement. The spiral pattern in the dirt floor was wider now, maybe 8 feet across. The dirt in the center was mounded up, pushed from below, like something was pressing against it from underneath. I should have left, should have walked out of that house and let my great-aunt's will be damned. But I needed that inheritance, needed the money from selling the house, needed it so badly that I convinced myself there was a rational explanation. I started digging. Not in the spiral, I wasn't that stupid, but along the edges of the basement, against the foundation wall, trying to understand how far down the stone went. If there was bedrock, I'd hit it quickly. If there wasn't, my shovel hit wood at 4 feet down. Not bedrock, wood, old timber, horizontal, like a ceiling beam. It was hand-hewn, ancient, the wood gray with age, and I could hear something below it, breathing, deep, slow. The sound of something large inhaling and exhaling. I dropped the shovel and ran upstairs, locked the basement door, spent the rest of the night in my car, engine running, ready to drive away. But I didn't leave, because at 7 in the morning, I got a call from the county tax office. They'd been reviewing property records and found something strange. The Mosley house was registered as a 2-story structure with a basement, but the original 1893 building permit listed it as a 3-story structure with 2 basements. 2 basements. The house had been shortened. Sometime between 1893 and now, someone had sealed off the bottom floor, buried it, hidden it beneath dirt and stone and a new foundation, and something was trying to dig it back open. I went to the county library, found a newspaper article from March 1894. Tragedy at the Mosley residence. Family vanishes. The Mosley family, father, mother, and 5 children had disappeared. The house was found empty, the door standing open, the basement door nailed shut from the outside. Neighbors reported hearing digging sounds for 3 days before the family vanished. A search of the property found nothing. The family was never seen again. The house was seized by the county and later sold. Over the next 130 years, it passed through 26 owners. My great-aunt Cecilia had lived there the longest, 42 years, and she died in the house, alone, with no evidence of foul play, but her death certificate listed something strange under notes. Deceased found in basement, cause of fall undetermined. Basement door was locked from inside. How do you lock a door from inside, fall down the stairs, and end up in a basement with no one else there to lock the door behind you, unless you were pushed or pulled? I went back to the house that afternoon, measured the basement again, 46 feet long now, still 30 feet wide. 3 more feet of depth had appeared overnight. The spiral in the dirt floor was 15 feet across. The center mound was higher, like something was pressing up with more force. I could see cracks forming in the dirt, thin lines radiating out from the center. Something was close, almost through. I should have called the police, should have evacuated, should have done literally anything except what I did next. I got my shovel and started digging in the center of the spiral. I had to know, had to see what was beneath my basement, what had been buried there for 130 years, what wanted back up so badly it had been digging for over a century. The dirt was soft, recently disturbed by whatever was working from below. I dug down 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet. My shovel hit wood, that same old hand-hewn timber. But this time, when I brushed the dirt away, I found something else. A door, wooden, horizontal, set into the timber like a hatch, and it was moving, breathing with that same slow rhythm I'd heard earlier, rising and falling slightly, like something on the other side was testing its strength. There were words carved into the door. I wiped away the dirt and read them by flashlight. The second basement. They are still digging. I stopped digging, started to climb out of the hole. The door beneath me opened, not violently, slowly, almost gently, like someone on the other side was being careful not to startle me. The wood swung down on hinges that shouldn't have existed, revealing darkness below. Darkness and the smell of earth and rot, and something else, something that had been sealed underground for 130 years. I saw them in the darkness. The Mosley family. Father, mother, 5 children, standing in what looked like another basement beneath my basement, standing in a space that was impossible, that shouldn't exist, that defied every law of physics and geometry. They were still digging. Their hands were worn to bone, fingers scraped down to bloody stumps, but they were still moving those hands in digging motions, still clawing at the walls of their underground prison, still trying to excavate upward toward the surface. They'd been digging for 130 years, and they'd almost broken through. The father looked up at me. His face was desiccated, dried leather stretched over bone, but his eyes were alive, desperate, pleading. "Help us up," he whispered. "Help us finish. We're so close. We've been digging so long. Just help us up into your basement, and we can rest. We can finally rest." Behind him, I saw more people, 26 shapes in the darkness, the 26 previous owners of the house, including my great-aunt Cecilia, all standing in that impossible basement, all still digging at the walls, all trying to reach the surface, all dead but still moving. The house takes its owners, the Mosley father said. 1 year. Part of the basement that grows. I saw my great-aunt. She was digging at the far wall with hands worn down to bone, her face locked in an expression of confused determination. She'd been dead for 3 months. She'd been digging for 3 months. We dig down, the father said. The house makes us dig deeper, makes the basement grow. 3 feet every night, forever, until we reach something. Until we excavate all the way through the mountain and come out the other side. That's what the house wants. To dig through. To come out below. Below what? Everything. The mountain. The rock. The world. The house wants to dig through reality and come out underneath, where the foundation of everything is weak, and when it does, when we break through, the house will fall into that beneath space, and it will take everyone with it. Everyone who's ever lived here. Everyone who's ever owned it. Everyone who's inside when the breakthrough happens. I tried to climb out of the hole. The dirt walls crumbled. I slid down, fell through the open hatch, landed in the second basement with the Mosley family and the 26 previous owners. The hatch closed above me. I heard dirt pouring in, filling the hole I dug, sealing me into this impossible space. Don't worry, my great-aunt Cecilia said, her voice hollow and distant. You'll get used to digging. We all did. And in a year, the house will bring us someone new, someone to inherit the property, someone to live here and measure the basement and wonder why it's growing, someone to join the crew. I've been digging for 6 days now. My hands are bleeding, my fingers are wearing down. But I can't stop. The house makes me dig. Some compulsion in this space, some property of the impossible geometry, forces my hands to move in digging motions even when I try to rest. We're 43 feet deeper than we were when I fell through. The basement grows 3 feet every night because we're digging it from below. All 28 of us, working in shifts that never end, excavating down and down and down. I can feel what we're digging toward now. Something vast beneath the mountain, something empty, something that's been waiting for a very long time to be opened from above. The house wants to fall into it, wants to break through the last layer of stone and drop into that beneath space, taking all of us with it. And we're close, so close. Another month, maybe 2, and we'll break through. And when we do, the Mosley house will finally reach the foundation below the foundation, the basement below all basements, the space beneath reality, where houses like this one were always meant to end up. I hope whoever inherits this place after me is smarter than I was. I hope they read this warning before they measure the basement, before they hear the digging, before they open the hatch and fall into a space that grows 3 feet deeper every night, dug by the desperate hands of everyone who ever thought they owned this house. The house owns us. We're just the tools it uses to dig its way down to where it's always belonged. 3 feet deeper, every night, forever. Keep digging. We're almost through.